Me and Bob Ross actually had a long talk about, really feeling the artwork. But, he freaked out whenever I started cutting myself to use my blood as a medium. I don't understand what he saw was wrong with it because, I was literally putting my heart and soul into the art. Or, not my soul. Ghosts don't talk to me anymore. They're too scared. But after that, it was all just... Things were weird with him.
You'd think he'd see your passion.
Right? I mean, Bob Ross was always just an inspiration to me, and I wish he would come back.
Well, thanks for being here. Once Patrick gets here, we can get started. But
Gotcha.
Not really sure when that'll be. Oh wait, what's this?
Sorry, I'm late. I'm here. Let's do this thing.
You good?
Yeah,
Okay.
good. Sorry I'm late. I just had to answer to the Coca-Cola company. And this is Two Geeks Talk Film.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
And welcome to Two Geeks Talk Film. I'm Patrick.
I'm Devon.
And we're two geeks here to talk to you about movies we love.
Movies we hate.
And movies we wish would be shot off the face of the earth. With us today is our first guest, Cody, who is also my roommate here at Village Studios, as I like to call it. And today we're going to be talking about a movie that I introduced him to, but that we all love, and it is Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. So, real quick, before we go into the movie, what's your story on, how you got into movies and stuff?
I've been seeing movies ever since, a lot of people remember their first one, but I've been seeing them since I was just a little kid. There's not a time in my life that I can't remember seeing movies. Some of my fondest memories were with classics, like Princess Bride, Star Wars Saga, stuff like that, because my grandparents had a lot of VHS tapes at their house growing up, and that's sort of some of my earliest and fondest memories of movies, And so I had a very strong fantasy background, I guess, sort of an inspiration, because everyone has their one genre they look back on, from their childhood.
Do you remember, the first movie you went to see?
I don't remember the first movie that I ever went to see. I just remember, growing up on Star Wars specifically. That's probably my earliest movie memories. Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Terminator, Princess Bride. Those were probably some of the first things that I remember, really.
So, like I said before, I'm the one that introduced you to Dr. Strangelove last semester sometime. But kind of give us what your initial thoughts were on that when you saw it.
Well, I like older movies, but, Dr. Strangelove is significantly older than a lot of people are willing to watch. And I was wondering if that would hamper my enjoyment of the movie at all, but it really did not. Whether it's because it was ahead of its time in comedy, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was. And I thought it was completely hilarious. The style of humor, and, I'm a history major, so just knowing the context of the entire movie and the situation that it came out in really made it more enjoyable for me.
I can't remember exactly when I first heard about the movie. I think I probably heard it within the context of movies that James Earl Jones was in, which oddly he's in this, but he's just more of kind of an incidental character. He's not really a major player like Slim Pickens or Peter Sellers.
And as early as he showed up in the movie, it was very surprising for me because, you were like, Cody, you have to see this movie. It's so great. And I was watching it. And then all of a sudden, oh, there's James Earl Jones.
Yeah, exactly. And when I was watching that movie, when I first watched it, that was, I think, one of the things I was probably looking for was James Earl Jones, but I didn't know that he wasn't exactly a main character in it. Of course, that didn't really detract from it. I think where I first got the movie was this VHS right here. I got it around the time I started my collection of it, and I saw it and I completely loved it. And then a while back, I got the Criterion Laserdisc of it, which has this nice cover art here, and then a gatefold that's got different stuff in there, and it kind of comes with a bunch of other special features as well. Why don't you kind of give the synopsis of it?
All right. Well, Doctor Strangelove more or less is about this military plan. And the plan stated that in the event of a nuclear war of some sort with the Soviet Union, that if their chain of command was interrupted, they were worried they would be unable to issue any kind of counterstrike. So, more or less, they gave the ability to issue a nuclear launch order to a lower echelon commander. And this was only to be used, they stressed this, only to be used if the chain of command was incompetent or destroyed or possibly under control by the enemy.
Essentially, if there was no way to communicate with the president, who was supposed to be the only one to have the authority to issue a nuclear strike.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, it plays into the paranoia of the time period in the 60s. There was so much fear that we were all going to be annihilated in this huge nuclear conflict that one general, General Ripper, who just went completely insane, gave the order to attack Russia with his planes, meaning that the only options available to the government at that time were to basically do nothing because, it's not an active national policy and be wiped out by Russian retaliation, or they were going to have to commit to Ripper's attack and destroy Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea there was that if they could surprise Russia and take them all out in one big offensive that they never saw coming, they would have no chance to actually do anything in retaliation because they would be completely wiped out.
Exactly. And the reason why, the president can't just call off the attack himself from the planes is that they were given this 3-letter prefix, which all incoming messages to the planes have to be using, or else the planes won't respond to them.
And the messages won't even be received. And all communications to General Ripper's base were cut off. And Ripper basically told them that anyone who approached the base in an attempt to stop the nuclear strike was a communist disguised as an American.
Exactly. And so...
The only person that knew that code would be Ripper.
Yeah, exactly. General Ripper is the only person that knows that code. Of course, the reason to keep the code secret would be to keep the enemy from infiltrating the radio waves and trying to issue either fake commands or confusing commands to try to stop the U.S.'s retaliation if it were to ever come to that. So it essentially shifts focus between, I believe it's 3 different settings. You have the War Room, and you have Burleson Air Force Base. There were General Ripper and Group Captain Lionel Mandrake are at. And then you also have one of the airplanes that's following General Ripper's orders.
And in the War Room, the president is more or less discussing what his options are because he doesn't want to start a war with Russia. He thinks that it's bad national policy for them to launch first, And so... they basically figured that the smartest thing to do would be to get the Russian ambassador in the room, put all their cards on the table, let him know exactly what happened, so that he could communicate that it was not any action by the U.S. against Russia, that it was a rogue agent, and basically they resolved to try and take out the American planes before they could ever reach their targets.
The president's on the phone with
the Russian leader,
Premier Kissoff, that he's on the phone with, and I would say this is probably one of the first real bits of actual comedy, and probably one of the first moments in the movie that you would actually really laugh at, when he's just trying to awkwardly explain to Premier Kissoff what exactly happened.
It honestly gets pretty ridiculous because he's trying to do it in such a way that he's not inflaming the situation at all.
Exactly.
And it's also made clear that the Russian leader is actually inebriated at this time.
Hello, Dmitri. Listen, I can't hear too well. Do you suppose you could turn the music down just a little? Oh, that's much better.
It's a great comedy that's very much a product of its time, but I think, we still have enough people that, remember the whole Red Scare back then and the whole threat of nuclear annihilation, which some people might even tell you is still around today with North Korea and the, pumpkin spice latte bathing Cheeto that is our president.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, I think another really important thing to consider with this movie is not just the fact that the Red Scare was at the time, but that it was really, you know, at its height in the 1960s, you know. Before that, we had the Red Scare, but in the 1950s, everyone was more or less kept happy and complacent. You know, they were still scared, but nowhere near the level of the 1960s, especially with, you know, Richard Nixon and all the distrust with the government and everything else. They actually had to delay the release of the movie because JFK had been assassinated, if that tells you anything about the turmoil of the time, really.
Exactly, because I think it was the preview screenings that were set to begin on November 22nd, 1963, and of course, before that was able to happen, on that same day, President Kennedy was killed in Dallas, which caused them, of course, to delay the initial release of the movie. But also there's a scene in there where Slim Pickens, the pilot of the plane, he's reading off this list of things that they have in their little rations kit.
1 issue of prophylactics, 3 lipsticks, 3 pair of nylon stockings. Shoot, a fella could have a pretty good weekend in Vegas with all that stuff.
He had to dub over saying Vegas, but his original line was a fellow could have a good time in Dallas with that. And so they actually changed it because of what had just obviously happened in Dallas. And I remember one of the things you telling me, Cody, was after we saw this was that, you know, considering everything about like the turmoil when this film was released, it's surprising that it's as well received as it was, because this was a very dark and almost like not even a comedy at all.
Yeah, I mean, some comedies can make you feel better about a bleak or depressing or even, you know, a scary situation, but Dr. Strangelove was not a movie that did that. It was a movie that made it worse, if anything. It was almost mean-spirited, just the way that it, especially the way that it ends, you know.
Exactly. Like, there's very little, if any, slapstick in the movie. Most of the humor is just pretty subtle. I guess maybe there's a few exceptions in there.
Well, the beautiful thing about it is that it really does it's all based on the tension, you know. They actually ramp up the tension through quite a lot of serious material, especially for a comedy in the movie. And it's because of this that it all becomes so ironic whenever they do ridiculous things. It's just unexpected.
And something I found interesting was that they just jump back and forth between ridiculous comedy and super serious drama.
The way it's juxtaposed is like, you know, there's one scene where they're in the war room, and General Turgidson is on the line with his girlfriend or mistress or whoever that is.
I think it's strongly implied she's his mistress.
Yeah, and he's having some like couples argument with her. But then, as soon as that's over with, it's obviously played for laughs. As soon as that's over with, it just goes back to, hey, this nuclear threat.
You go back to sleep, hon. Bucky will be back there just as soon as he can. All right? Listen, Shug, don't forget to say your prayers.
Apparently,
even though we're talking about how it juxtaposes these situations so much throughout the whole movie, it really doesn't even get funny at all in the entire opening sequence for a good bit of time. I mean, most people who watch Dr. Strangelove or not most people, but a lot of people who watch it will look at it and be surprised that it is a comedy until they've watched the whole thing.
Where is that one, your both of yours, inside joke? How far in the movie is that?
It's within probably the first 10 or so 15 minutes.
I'd say 20.
Of the movie, yeah.
Because they find out that the nuclear threat has been issued. General Ripper's putting his base on red alert. And then the general what's his name? Turgidson. Yeah. He gets his call on the phone. And it was at this point that me and Patrick here, I call him Patsy, because we love each other. And the joke is that as soon as Turgidson is trying to figure out what exactly they need to do about the situation, he sits up with his giant bare, hairy chest and just slaps his gut.
I tell you what you better do, old buddy.
We could only describe it as George C. Scott being himself.
Yeah. George C. Scott making George C. Scott-esque noises.
Mm-hmm. I mean, really, he's like a younger Rip Torn, you know, if they were the same person, which obviously they're not. Rip Torn's in today's age, you would know him as the loud boss guy from Men in Black.
Go get him, Tiger.
That's what General Turgison sounds like. One of the examples of subtle humor in the show is actually made a lot funnier if you understand a lot of the history of the time period. And I'm actually a history major right now. And one of the things was, for example, them talking about why Russia would ever build a doomsday device in the first place. And they said that it was ultimately more cost-effective.
But in the end, we could not keep up with the expense involved in the arms race, the space race, and the peace race.
And he said all the while the people were asking for more amenities like they had in America, such as washing machines. And that's actually a reference to whenever the president at the time actually visited Russia, and he was telling everyone about all of our wonderful amenities that every American household had, but Russia did not. Mm-hmm. And they actually didn't believe it because it sounded so good to them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And of course, I don't think we've actually mentioned that one of the big reasons that they're trying to stop these planes from getting to their targets in Russia is because they found out that Russia has built this doomsday device that, if triggered, will completely wipe out all of civilization on Earth.
It was meant to be a deterrent to keep any kind of nuclear conflict from happening at all, except that it was made automated, so there's no longer any human element. So once this huge mistake has been made, they can't deactivate it.
Exactly. If any attempt is made to deactivate it, it will, ironically, activate it, which, of course, is explained as to why they weren't told. Ripper is convinced that the fluoridation of water is a communist conspiracy to, like, I guess, control America. Or,
basically,
it's gonna control America's population. He says that it ruins our essence. It dilutes the purity of our essence, and so pure, healthy American children can no longer be born.
And I think it's also kind of humorous how he apparently came to this conclusion.
During the physical act of love.
I think the culmination of General Ripper's arc of insanity, I guess, is that whenever American troops actually begin storming his base to get the recall code from General Ripper, he begins to ask Mandrake,
Did they torture you?
Mandrake trying very awkwardly to get him to say the code.
Now, supposing I play a little guessing game with you, Jack boy. I'll try and guess what the code is.
You're not sure if you should laugh or if you should be sad. You can see the gears turning in his head. You can tell what he's about to do.
And the fact that it's a comedic situation based upon something that's morally repugnant is the fact it's part of the beauty of the whole movie is that the whole time there's nothing singularly funny about any one situation. The comedy is derived from the tension, which is built up through all the serious elements, and then people realize just how ridiculous everything that's happening is. So him killing himself, not funny on its own, but the fact that he's done something so ridiculous that it actually led to the series of events which caused him to kill himself is what makes it hilarious. The whole situation itself is inherently ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and, it's like, it almost seems like, wow, this is what would really happen were this situation to go down, because everyone would be kind of in the midst of living their lives, like, General Turgidson, when he's called over to the Pentagon to see what's going on, he's middle of the night love-making session with, I guess, his mistress.
Who is also the supermodel that you see in the magazine one of the pilots is reading.
Exactly.
Which we actually have. The Criterion Blu-ray actually comes with this little thing, and there is a fold-out right here, just like in the movie. Have you seen this?
Yeah. Okay. I had a gander.
I like that little thing at the back there. Have you ever seen a commie drink a glass of water? There. Yeah.
Right here.
Oh, they have the miniature combination Ruski phrase book and Bible.
It's got like the...
We are pausing for a little ad for the Criterion Collection Blu-rays.
If you chop off your left nut and mail it to me, then we will give you our copy. My home address is 2114
Cody, I don't want chopped off, dismembered nuts laying all over our dorm room.
I hope this isn't the final take.
Okay, if you know what they do for alcohol in the dorm, imagine what they would do for severed testicles.
Fine.
All right, so one thing I've heard someone say about this movie is that, obviously this is supposed to be a satire and kind of cause for us to think about just how ridiculous the idea of arms race and, like, nuclear warfare is. But the odd thing about it is, with this being like as slow of a movie as it is, and with the comedy being as like not
situational,
as more subtle as well, like it's almost like the very people that would probably benefit the most from watching this probably couldn't even get past the first 10 minutes of it, because they'd just be completely bored by it. As I mentioned before, the Cheeto bathing in a pumpkin spice latte that we have decided to elect as our president, he might, benefit from watching this, but he might also try to ban it in this country.
Not only are the serious parts serious, but they feel real. Like the war stuff looks like, it's all handheld cam. It's not like Hollywood type stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like Saving Private Ryan type stuff.
And I think that adds to the fact that it doesn't always come off as a comedy.
Yeah.
And
like, we'll go from the war stuff, and then we'll go directly back to Ripper, just like spitting off one-liners.
My precious bodily fluids.
Tangents of the purity of essence.
Yeah.
Well, he's in a lucid state between, sanity and insanity at any given moment. You can't really tell, because everything he does follows a very logical progression. I mean, even his plan, while crazy, take away the whole purity of essence thing, could honestly have just been the actions of a perfectly sane but ambitious general who wanted to make sure that the United States was going to win this war before it ever happened.
Exactly, and, Turgidsen's proposed response to this by sending a complete nuclear strike to hit Russia even before the planes sent to bomb Russia got to their targets, when you think about it, in that particular situation where you're not able to recall the planes, that is likely, by circumstance, the most sane thing to do.
As a matter of fact, I would say it's probably the smartest thing they could have done in the whole movie, because ever since they involved the Russian ambassador in the thing, it really only complicated things further, and they spent the whole time arguing until eventually they all ended up blowing up before they could figure out what they were going to do.
And, it's odd that, back in those times, not enough people would have really thought much of it at the time. I mean, Americans, we finally decided to nuke the crap out of the Soviets. Well, I mean...
We didn't know about the Doomsday device, though.
Exactly.
A movie like this, a movie of this nature, if it were made today, probably would not be well received, because nowadays the way that we deal with criticism is so different. It was very well received when it came out, despite the terrible things that happened around the time that it did come out. Mm-hmm. But I'd say a really good parallel, honestly, though the quality of the comedy is maybe a little different. But The Interview, whenever that came out, it is in a lot of ways what could have happened to Dr. Strangelove in a different culture.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We literally had threats from another nation that we were making this film about them.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if that exactly happened with the making of Dr. Strangelove or not.
Well, I don't think it did at all. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is because the attitudes of the two nations, Russia and North Korea, they're very different,
Mm-hmm. And also, The Interview, while I haven't seen it, seems to be more of like an in-your-face, overt, like
It is.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
It focuses on a single individual.
It's
not a
I don't
country.
think it quite has subtlety down, nor does it want
No.
to, as well as Doctor Strangelove.
And you
would.
know, who knows? Maybe if the interview was a more subtle comedy, a smarter comedy, it might have been received the same way. But somehow I just don't think it would have been. You know, I think that it would have been received the same way internationally, maybe not so much domestically.
I think another thing to point out is that back then, in the 60s, they didn't have international marketing. I'm sure they did, but I'm sure they didn't market to Russia.
Exactly, and I think that even if they would have, this movie it's more lampooning the United States government than it is Russia, because the only way we get to see the Russians is, you know, the ambassador and just the president talking on the phone with Dmitry, but of course...
You see the equality with which they treat both governments, unlike in, say, The Interview, which I guess we're making parallels with now, where the United States government is a well-oiled machine. You know, it knows exactly what it's doing, it's smart and it's intelligent, and their main assumption is that North Korea is full of morons.
Exactly.
But then again, that's basically every, like, take any Michael Bay movie, and it's basically the same thing. The United States government is just the best thing ever. Mm-hmm. And back then, they were sort of going against the grain, even though there weren't that many depictions.
Yeah, I mean, especially for its time, Dr. Strangelove really did criticize our government because it believed that something like this really could happen, even though it was being satirical. Because if you strip away all of the comedic layers to all of these characters, like Turgidson and Ripper and the President, they have quirks and they're strange, but their motivations are ultimately very realistic.
Exactly.
Have we talked about Dr. Strangelove yet?
We actually haven't, and I
Yeah,
was
we
thinking
talked
about
about-
that. Like we're talking about the movie Doctor Strangelove, but we don't talk about the character Doctor Strangelove,
Which is probably the weirdest character in the movie.
Exactly.
And I would say that I have two really good questions specifically about Strangelove himself. First off, you know, why is Dr. Strangelove the title character whenever he honestly plays a fairly minor role in the entire film?
Exactly. Like of course, the movie is called Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. It almost seems like How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb would be a more fitting title.
I think one of the reasons is that he's basically their guider. Mm-hmm. They guide the president and everyone in the war room to what they should do.
Exactly. He was a German at one point. Then he moved to America and changed his name to Strangelove.
Well, I think he's the ultimate symbol of the message of the movie, is this insanity and this the fact that it really serves no one. Dr. Strangelove is the only character who can be said to truly be insane compared to every other character. Dr. Strangelove is a person who is shown to almost be aroused by the idea of murdering everybody.
Exactly, and
The robotic arm.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think it's a robotic arm. I think it's like a depiction of his own insanity being so his attempts to control himself and make himself appear like a reasonable person that everyone else can listen to. It's such a struggle against his actual self that he's literally pulling his arm back down from a Nazi salute.
Exactly, and you know, at one point, whenever they decide that if this doomsday device is triggered, then they would have to move, you know, all these American citizens into these deep mine shafts where the radiation wouldn't penetrate. And obviously, while we have a lot of mine shaft space, we wouldn't have enough for every single American. And so Strangelove brings the idea that, you know, we should only choose the people who we feel would best serve our needs as a country when we reemerge, genetically speaking, which, you know, it's the whole Aryan race idea is what Hitler's regime was built on.
Well, I think that his history as a Nazi scientist, coupled with his knowledge of nuclear weapons, and the fact that he honestly seems to relish the idea of these bombs going off and killing everyone, really just shows the fact that Dr. Strangelove is nothing more than someone who just wants to see discord and chaos get sown all over the place, you know? It's like he's less of a person and more of a symbol for the movie.
Exactly. And actually, you know, while that's not my entire, like, theory on him, I think this is what I've heard, is that, of course, you know, he's in a wheelchair, obviously handicapped, and I think what I've heard from some people is that that's supposed to represent the whole idea of Nazism and fascism, how at that point it's still alive, but it's crippled, but as they continue to talk more and more about the idea of, you know, only selecting the most preferable people to allow to survive this nuclear holocaust, he becomes, you know, more and more strong until, like, you know, that last line of the movie.
And it's also, you know, it represents the irony of those beliefs in the first place. You know, it's ridiculous that everyone's concerning themselves with making sure that everyone's pure and perfect, even with, you know, the General Ripper motif.
Mm-hmm.
But Dr. Strangelove himself is a cripple. I think we should probably cap off this episode with, you guys said that you usually go over your favorite scenes.
Like I said, there are a lot of very subtle things in there. One of which being the cigar that Ripper is always smoking. I think you made the comment while we were watching that movie, that cigar is as erect as he is. Or something like that.
It's the biggest phallic symbol in the entire movie, next to a guy literally straddling a rocket to the earth.
There was also a scene where Mandrake was looking over that little thing of notes. It looks like it's an arrow, maybe meant to be an arrow, but it's very obviously drawn as like a penis on there.
So it means the writers were very much aware of just what they were doing with that character too.
Exactly.
The Purity of Essence scene is probably one of my favorite, just because that's when I figured out just how batshit this movie is going to be.
I do not avoid women, Mandrake. Yeah. But I do deny them my essence.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, up until this point, you know, he seemed unhinged but still sane.
Yeah.
And then he starts going on about fluoridation and, you know, in our water, in our drinking water.
And it's odd how, like, seemingly the more pacifistic characters like Mandrake and President Muffley, that both played by Peter Sellers, by the way, who played, I think, about 3 different characters in this movie. Probably like the MVP of this movie. You know, they're both portrayed as these very weak, almost spineless figures that are just kind of very polite and don't really want any major damage.
They don't get
done.
results.
Exactly. And, you know, the ones like General Turgidson and General Ripper, they're obviously, you know, warmongering, but you can also tell they're like really trying to compensate too.
And, you know, they are both trying to get something done. It's almost like the movie's got this almost hypocritical idea of, well, you know, war is wrong and these people are killing everyone and they're insane. But if you're not one of these people, then, and you're, you know, trying to take a better path, I guess, you more or less come across as spineless.
Exactly.
And it's like, you know, there are no winners in this particular debate.
I don't know if I have a favorite one scene. Anytime, like, one of Peter Sellers' characters, like, when the president is having that awkward conversation with the premier.
Oh, he went a little funny in the head. You know, just a little funny.
Anytime Mandrake is having some awkward exchange with General Ripper. In fact, I think probably my favorite line of his.
And I drink a lot of water, you know. I'm what you might call a water man, Jack. That's what I am.
When Turgidson is talking on the phone with his mistress.
Of course, it isn't only physical. I deeply respect you as a human being. Someday I'm going to make you Mrs. Buck Turgidson.
Examples of juxtaposing the extreme serious with the batshit hilarious.
And then, like, he kind of caps it off with, "Hey, Shug, be sure to say your prayers tonight."
Yeah, that was kind of
another
weird.
example of, you know, irony or just being a hypocrite or whatever, because the movie has a lot of that. I think my favorite scene, and it's a tough debate for me, I have to try and decide between the final scene where in the war room where things finally just reach a crescendo of crazy, or the Purity of Essence scene, just because as fantastic as the guy who does 3 characters is, as fantastic as he is, the guy playing General Ripper honestly manages to steal every scene that he's in. He does a fantastic job.
Sterling Hayden, I believe, is the actor's name.
So really, I'm caught between, one fantastic actor who's just selling the crap out of one character, or, the ultimate comic genius of the whole movie finally just coming together in this last crazy scene.
By the way, we forgot to mention the ending scene was actually changed.
It was supposed to be a pie fight.
Since they were laughing, it was unusable because instead of having that totally black, which would have been an amazing, like this blizzard, which in a sense is metaphorical for all the missiles that are coming.
And the last shot was the President of the United States and the Russian ambassador covered in custard pies going, patty cake, baker's man. And it was something very upsetting and sad and funny.
One of the shots showed the president being hit in the face by a cream pie. And I think it's George C. Scott who says, "Gentlemen, our beloved president has been cut down in his prime." And of course, the film had to open after the assassination of Kennedy.
There's no actual footage remaining of it, but there are still frames.
Yeah, there's frames.
Yeah, there's still frames remaining of it. Actually,
I guess it just wasn't dark enough for the writers. In the final product.
Like you said, it wasn't dark enough. You basically had 2 roads you could go down. You could go down this extremely dark road to satisfy this one side of the movie, or you could satisfy the extreme absurd side of the movie and do this pie fight.
I have a hard time figuring out how exactly they would have worked that in, though, because a lot of the absurdity up until the guy writing the bomb down, the absurdity has just been kind of subtle up until that point.
It's been mostly dialogue, and then they were just okay.
So let's also talk about that, because the iconic shot of the movie, which you see parodied a lot of places, is of Major Kong riding the bomb down, waving his cowboy hat as he is riding down towards this trigger of mutually assured destruction, which I would have to say that's definitely one of my favorite parts of the movie,
especially because he really becomes part of the bomb, and symbolically his idea of he thinks he's saving the world and he's really ruining everything.
Exactly.
Part of the reason that it doesn't fit in the final product, not just because it's not dark enough, but because they needed to resolve the plot line ultimately. And so both ideas would have put a very sudden end to things, but none of it really resolves itself. And so with a pie fight, as hilarious as that is, and as much as it might finally be the cornerstone of this whole crazy thing they've gotten into, where it really just comes together and is really just insane, is, I don't know, it doesn't resolve the final plot line, though. Unlike a nuclear bomb, which resolves it simply by saying, and then everyone died.
Yeah.
Do we know if the pie fight would have preceded the original ending, or if it would have replaced it?
It would have replaced it.
Oh.
So I would probably recommend these movies to someone who is really into history and stuff, because this really does touch on the Cold War and nuclear arms race and everything. And also, if you like very subtle, absurd humor, it would also be a really good movie for you. It's slow for about the first 15 minutes, but once you understand what's going on, it gets a lot better.
If you are not a patient person, and I know that's ironic coming from me, maybe not the movie for you.
No.
So that, I think, wraps up this episode here. Thanks for watching. If you like it, be sure to click like, comment, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this, we'll try to get to it. And
thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. Keep watching, and thanks for watching
Two Geeks Talk Film.